Where were you the last weekend of April 2023? Well, I don't know about you, but hundreds of readers and myself had a fantastic 3 days at the Spring Summer Epigraph Literary Festival. It was really a great time. Oh my gosh. Authors were sharing about their new books. I was laughing so hard during the happy hours, and I learned so many new things at our lifestyle-themed sessions. So, if you missed the festival, or you want to relive the highlights, visit epigraphLitFest.com and select replays. That's epigraphLitFest.com and select replays. Your TBR will explode, you'll learn a thing or two, and you'll have lots of laughs, especially at those happy hour sessions. So go to epigraphLitFest.com and select replays. Hello, I'm Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Lorenzo Carcaterra to talk about his latest novel, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace, and his plans for the Nona Maria series. Now, Lorenzo Carcaterra is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of numerous books, and he's also a former writer and producer for Law and Order. And he has written for National Geographic Traveler, the New York Times Magazine, and other publications. But in his latest book, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace, we see 70-year-old widow Nona Maria dealing with two mysteries. The first is the murder of an unidentified woman found by the side of the road, and the second is an accusation of theft made against Nona Maria's goddaughter, Loretta. Now, though this is a mystery novel, it serves up a heavy dose of armchair travel, so be prepared to travel to Italy, and specifically the island of Ischia, which is off the coast of Naples. Now, in this episode, Lorenzo and I talk about so many things, from his inspiration to write the Nona Maria series, to him spending summers in Ischia growing up, and we even get some great Italian travel recommendations. Lorenzo also talks about his writing and reading life. We get lots of book recommendations, learn more about what inspires him, and lots more. So let's get into the episode, because this was a great conversation filled with lots of amazing stories. So let's get into my chat with author Lorenzo Carcaterra. Hi there, could you do me a favor really quick? Would you pretty please subscribe to the show, leave me a 5-star rating if you like it, and share an episode or two with your bookish friends? Better yet, if you could drop a link to the show or to your favorite episode in your book club or bookish group chat, that works too. I promise it only takes a few seconds. It really helps the show. Plus, I'll be incredibly grateful for it. So thanks in advance, and now on to the episode. Hi readers, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of numerous books, and he's also a former writer and producer for Law and Order, and has written for National Geographic Traveler, the New York Times Magazine, and other publications. But he's here on the couch with me to talk about his latest novel, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace. Please welcome to the couch, Lorenzo Carcaterra. Hi, Lorenzo.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you. Thank you for asking me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So your new book, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace, it's now available. Readers can get their hands on a copy. How are you feeling? How excited are you about this one?
I am. I mean, I'm finishing up. I'm actually on the second draft of the third one. And my only concern was, a lot of months pass between when you finish and publication. So I did my first event last night in Brooklyn, and I said, "God, I hope I remember the plot to this, because I'm focused on the plot to the third one." But I'm really, I'm kind of thrilled that the audience has embraced Nona Maria and seems to have embraced her and loves her for the things that I love her for, and with each with each book gets to know her even better. So that much I like, and I really appreciate that that Ischia has become, a lot of visitors are going. When I was younger, I've been going to Ischia since I was 14, and
Mm.
much older now. And back then, there were very, very few Americans there, hardly any. And now, 80% of the tourists are American. And it's not because of Nona Maria. I'd love to have her take full credit, but it's Travel and Leisure magazine named it the most beautiful island in the world, and I think Americans have discovered it, which I'm kind of excited about and happy about. So it's a big change from when I was younger.
Wow, wow. That's actually just really great to hear. And for folks who don't know, and I'm sure you know better than me, I think it's off the coast of Naples, right?
It's 18 miles off the coast of Naples. It's a very large island. I mean, Americans know Capri for years. When I was younger, when I worked there as a teenager, I worked for my uncle as a tour guide. He had a big tour business. Most of the tourists were British and German and Northern Italians. So I got to do some of the tours with the British tourists who were great tourists. And what I noticed as a kid with British and German tourists, they take notes. They would come year after year after year and just take notes about each tour and the history. I mean, it has a fantastic history, the island. And so it's a big tourist attraction. I mean, the population is about 65,000 people year round. But during the summer months of, especially July and August, there's about 300,000 people on the island.
Well, now folks are more open to options, so it's not just Capri. There's so many other places. So
Yeah, when I was a teenager there, Capri was attracted to the Americans. It goes back to when Jackie Kennedy was first lady. She would shop in Capri, so Americans were drawn to it because of that. Ischia became a tourist attraction in the late '60s because a few years earlier, this is way this is for the older members of your audience. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton had this torrid love affair on the island of Ischia, which got all the paparazzi going, and they took all these photos, and the developers saw this relatively undeveloped island and started building hotels and restaurants, and that brought in the tourists.
right, right, absolutely. Well, I want you to tell listeners about Nona Maria and the case of the stolen necklace, and what can they expect when they pick up this book?
Well, Nona Maria is she's a widow in her 70s. She gets involved in cases, but the only cases she gets involved in or gets involved with involve helping her friends. That's her whole purpose. And it's very much based on my actual Nona Maria, who I'd written about in a nonfiction book. Um, Nona, if a friend comes to her for help, she will do whatever she can to help them. Now she works in conjunction. She's not a cop. She's not going to make arrests. She's not going to do any of that. But what she has is a network of friends who help her when she takes a case on, and she works very closely with the carabinieri. And in this particular book, there were two cases. One, her goddaughter, who works at a hotel in Ischia, is accused of stealing a necklace by one of the guests, a very valuable necklace. And the second case is a woman is found dead on the side of a road in Barano, which is one of the boroughs of Ischia. And there's no identification. There's nothing. No one seems to know this woman, and it's almost as if she was just came out of the blue and found dead on the by the side of the road. And Nona Maria has this sinking feeling that back years ago, this was a woman she knew. Now she has not seen the body, she hasn't seen anything yet as yet, but she feels like there was a woman back many years ago who had to leave the island under certain conditions that she had tried vainly to help. And we all have friends like that in our lives, I think, that we try to help, and for whatever reason, we can't, or they won't accept the help, or they can't accept the help. They're in a situation where they can't make that move. So Nona Maria has this inkling feeling that, you know what, I think I know this woman, but I got to find out. So she goes about her business, and those are the two cases she works on. She works very closely with the Carabinieri captain, Paolo Morino. And the reason the Carabinieri is the cases have to be of a certain level to get the Carabinieri involved. So I can't have Nona Maria involved in a small traffic dispute, or somebody has their purse rifled through on the street corner. that's not enough to bring in the carabinieri, who are like federal officers, and that would be a case that goes to the municipal police, the local cops. And so I need to make the cases with each Nona Maria book of a level that would involve the carabinieri, and both a dead woman found on the road, and a high level theft, a potential theft in a hotel is would bring them in. So and she brings in her crew of friends. And each book I try to add a new member of the friends. They're all based on real people, and that I've known in Ischia, but the friends have not done the things I have them do in the novel. But there is a real Pepe the painter. There is a real Il Presidente. Those people actually exist. They just I've given them a lot more to do than they actually have ever done in life. They're more peaceful people in real life. So I hope people enjoy it. It's a really, I guess it's called a cozy mystery, but to me it's a mystery. It's a mystery novel. And Nona Maria, who is not a detective, she's not a cop, she's not going to carry a gun or anything like that. She's not going to make an arrest. She works off intuition and friendship, and that's her two skills that she combines to help solve the cases.
So I absolutely loved Nona Maria. The first book was Nona Maria and the Case of the Missing Bride. This book, which we're talking about, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace. Now, readers often ask this every time I intro a book and say, oh, I love this book. It's book 2, it's book 3, and they hear it's a series, they get nervous. So I'm just going to ask it to get it out the way. Do readers need to read book 1 to read and enjoy book 2?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I purposely wrote it in a way that it could stand alone. I mean, I hope that book 1, book 2, if you read book 2, will let you go back and say, if you like it enough, hey, let me give book 1 a shot. But no, I don't want to do a series where you have to read a certain book, you have to read them in order. Like, I'm a big fan of Daniel Silva, but I picked randomly. I mean, I have not done. I try to do them in order. I do John Grisham in order, and he doesn't have a recurring character, so I don't actually need to do him in order. But Silva, who does, I don't do in order, and I still can follow each book. So, I mean, each one I'll drop a little bit of the history of Ischia. So, there's some history in 1 that will not be repeated in 2, and not and in 3 will be additional new history. So that's the only thing they're really missing, is the history. But as far as plot, character, and all of that, you'll know as much about the characters and Nona in 2 as you did in 1.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm just happy you said it yourself, because I agree. You don't need to read book 1 first to enjoy book 2. I love that they're standalones. And I'm really enjoying this character. But I have to be honest and say, when I was reading your first book, I'm a reader. I remove the jacket from the book, I set it aside, and then I have my hardback and I'm there reading. So that is my reading style for most of my books. And when I was reading this one, my husband knows, don't bother me. You see me reading, don't bother me. But he'll take up the jacket to look to see what I'm reading instead of asking. So anyway, he sees your name and he's like, wait, what? Lorenzo Carcaterra, you're reading his book? And I'm like, yeah, but he's like, but this looks different, because he's such a huge fan of yours. He knows you from Sleepers, Street Boys, you're more gritty urban crime novels. So tell me about the change from those books that my husband is a huge fan of to now writing a mystery, which I'm a big fan of, and a bit more on the cozy side, and giving us Nona Maria, just someone that's so lovable, and the escape, that's Italy. So tell me about this difference and this change.
Well, it came about. I had written a nonfiction book called 3 Dreamers, and it was about the real Nona Maria, my mother, and my late wife, and how the 3 women, each in their own individual way, helped me become whatever I've become today, helped shape me and direct me in the path that my life has taken. After the book was finished, Random House, the editors, and my publisher, my editor, they were all taken with the real Nona Maria. And they asked if I would consider a series of books featuring her contemporary. The real Nona died in 1975, making her a contemporary character helping to solve crimes on the island of Ischia. So I said, let me think about it, because, like you said, it was a big change from what I've done. And as a rule, I'm not a big, the term cozy. I went through a bunch of cozy books, and they all look like, they involved a librarian and a cat. And so I said, I don't know if, can I do this? And also, the quiet secret that I didn't want to divulge was that there really isn't any crime in Ischia. And so I don't know what she would be solving. So I made some decisions, and I said, let's give it a shot with the first one. And I have to be honest, I had such a great time. And yes, it's different from the things I've written in the past. But script wise, I've done some love stories, romantic, some comedy stuff in the past. And it's time, your writing is writing. You want to just tell a story. And this just happened to be a story set in Italy. There's no heavy action in it. I'm very conscious of that. I mean, she's not going to pull a gun and turn into Dirty Harriet. She's not going to go in a bar and John Wick the whole place. Um, it's set in it, so it gave me a sense of balance. But it's kind of nice too. It's opened up a whole new audience that I didn't have previously. Mostly book clubs and women, and a lot of the books, the previous books, I think were more kind of, I'm guessing, were read mostly by men more than women. Maybe, I don't know for a fact, but that's the feeling I have. They were, more gritty, and so it's a nice change of pace, and it's it's not a reinvention. It's just it's telling a story, but a different kind of story. And I just look at it. A writer's a storyteller. I don't see myself as um, anything but telling a good story, and I wherever that story leads. If I were bored by this, I mean, the first key was I had a great time writing Nona 1. I had a great time writing Nona 2. Nona 3 has been a blast, a lot of fun. And how many more I'll do, that's up to the audience, that's up to myself, that's up to Random House. But so far, I've had a great time. Will I go back to some of the other stuff earlier? There are other books I do want to write that are grittier and tougher, and I'm going to try in the future to try to balance those two and continue this series. How we're going to do that is a conversation we're going to have over the summer with my publisher and my agent, and to see if I can, do one Nona, maybe one gritty book, and one Nona, or just do Nona, until they blow the whistle and tell me to go plant tomatoes. Um, you know, but it's fun. I see it as a change. I mean, other people see it more of it as a change than I do. Um, yeah, but your husband's right. It's not as gritty as Gangster or
Mm-hmm.
uh, Street Boys or Paradise City or any of those. But as long as it's fun and I love telling the story, and people think it's a good story, I'm comfortable with it. I have to be comfortable with the writing of it. I love the characters. I love Nona Maria, and the secondary characters are of great interest to me. Paolo Marino is the writing about the Carabinieri is very cool. So I'm having a good time, a great time, and I hope the readers do as well. And as long as I'm enjoying it, then we'll continue doing it.
Well, I'm glad you're having a great time because as a reader, I'm having a fabulous time reading Nona Maria. I'm so excited that you're on book 3, and I'll probe you for more information on book 3 soon. But I want us to break things up on a podcast and just have a fun game because, again, this is set in Italy.
Sure.
It's set on a beautiful island, and it really is a great escape. I love the characters, I love the mystery, but the setting is just so beautiful to read about. I think any reader who picks up this book will be transported to Italy. So we're going to play What to Do in Italy, and I'm going to just give you some situations. You can
Okay.
tell me what you would recommend or what Nona Maria would recommend, but it's going to be a good time. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So tell us, even though in the recent Nona Maria book, I found out Nona Maria hasn't been to Rome, but tell us 3 places in Italy that you would recommend readers visit.
Oh, that's easy. One, Florence. I wrote a book set in Florence called Midnight Angels. I spent practically 5-6 months on and off in Florence. It's a magical city. It's my one of my favorite cities in Italy, if not the favorite. It's also an easy, if you're visiting, it's a very easy walking city. I mean, you don't, It's a smaller city than, say, Rome, obviously. But every step of the way, it's surrounded by history. And the novel I was writing was about a lost work of Michelangelo. So I got into some great places. It has great restaurants, great food, and the people are really terrific. So that's one place I would definitely go. Um, Another favorite is Lake Como. I have sentimental reasons for loving Lake Como beyond its beauty. It was the last trip, and I had the privilege of covering Italy for a number of years for National Geographic Traveler, and it was the last trip I took with my late wife, and we spent a week in Lake Como, and it's really a beautiful spot. It's very romantic. I mean, it's just a serene, peaceful place. You can have a great time without leaving any part of the area. Just going across the lake and just taking a boat ride from one of the places to the other. And you'll get to see George Clooney's villa if that interests you. And it was just a wonderful place. So that's number two. I guess number three, if I can include Ischia, I would include San Gimignano, which is a medieval city outside of Florence and Siena. It's equidistant, I believe. It's a beautiful. It's almost like time is. It's not been touched by the passage of time, and even though while I was there in San Gimignano, the food is, it's a small medieval town with only a couple of restaurants, but I collect wine, and it had this amazing Brunello that I tasted at and the man's shop, and I said, it's and here's how much sometimes you forget how the world has shrunk. I said to the man, I said, I would order a case of this, but I just don't know how you would ship it to me. And it's a tiny little store in a tiny little place. And he just looked at me, he goes, "Ship? You mean mail?" I said, "Yeah, how would you send it to me?" He goes, "FedEx." And I said, "Oh, you have FedEx?" And he looked at me like, "Yes." Yes, it's a small town, but we're I also have a phone. I said, okay, all right. I'm an idiot. I'm an American idiot. I got it. Um, and So it's a very special place. I think your listeners would love going there. And so those are three off the top of my head, but there's like 103 in Italy. Italy is, I've been going since I was 14, as I said. That's over 50 years. And there's still sections of Italy I've not seen, like the Cinque Terre area, that I would love to explore. It's a magical country. The people are very nice. They just take life as it comes, and the food is fantastic. No matter where you go, you're not going to get a bad meal, and it's not expensive, as my son will attest to because he paid for every meal on our last trip. But it's. So those would be just off the top of my head three places I would go.
What are three meals you'd recommend? Three things folks should order off the menu for sure if they're visiting.
In Italy or in Ischia?
Italy.
In Italy, okay. In Florence, there's a restaurant called Pandemonium, which was owned by this wonderful woman. I don't know her name. You just have to call her Mama. So she's Mama. They make the best pasta with artichokes I've ever had, and fresh tomato. Artichoke and fresh tomato. You can eat that every day. I would probably eat that every day. In Ischia, there's a restaurant called Monte Corvo, which is one of my favorite restaurants in the world. It's in the mountains. I don't know how people find it. I mean, half the cab drivers don't even know where it is. But you get luck, you find it, and every time I've gone there, it's been crowded. And they make a great pasta puttanesca, which is one of the treasures of the island. But they also make what I love of theirs is a pasta and a white clam sauce. It was just absolutely delicious. And then there's a little place called Da Salvatore, which is only open for lunch, also in Ischia, but it's on the beach and it has about 10 tables. And they open at 12 and they close at 2:30. But they have the best pasta with oil and garlic, and then they make a salad with fresh tuna and tomato and basil and hot cherry peppers, and then they just keep bringing it. It's owned by a father and son. Now you have to prepare yourself. The father comes out to take the order. He's in his 80s. He's wearing an open shirt and a Speedo. This is my son's favorite restaurant. And then the son comes in. He's in his 60s. He brings out the food. He's wearing an open shirt and a Speedo. So if you get deal with that, then you're fine. And they're great. And Salvatore and Pepe, and they make the bruschetta. They make their own bread, and they grow their own tomatoes. That's the beauty of a place like Ischia. Everything is freshly grown, and so you're getting fresh tomatoes from their garden, fresh basil from their garden, fresh bread out of the oven, and they make a bruschetta that you can't beat. And the wine is fantastic. So, and it's table wine. It's not super expensive. So a meal will cost you, a great meal, from a bruschetta through the pasta, through the grilled bronzino if you want to have an entree fish. It's like we're talking like 60 euros for two people. That's, what was that? $60 for two, including the wine and the water and all of that. Yeah, there are other restaurants I could recommend and go on and on. But Pandemonium. Also, if you like steak, in Florence, Sostanza, the best steakhouse. Florence, as you know, is noted for their steaks. The best steakhouse probably in Italy, I would think. And so, yeah, you just eat a lot. You eat and drink a lot while you're there.
And the last thing I want to know is, tell us 3 places readers must explore in Italy.
I'll tell you one place I don't know if every reader can get into it. When I was doing the Midnight Angels, I got into the Vasari corridor in Florence, which is the corridor. If you've been to Florence, it's a mile corridor. It was built by the Medicis so they could go from their home to their office. The windows were designed by Michelangelo. So they were designed for the Medici family to look out, but nobody could see in. And it's an amazing corridor filled with photos of portraits of people from the various centuries. And it's every 20 feet there are prison bars blocking. A guard has to open the bars for you to go through. It's just a historically terrific place. Obviously, you got to go see all the works of Michelangelo in Florence. So I would just devote an entire, I don't know how much time you have, but as many days as you can spare, going from the David to the works of Da Vinci as well. And in Venice, for me, I was kind of taken with. I did a cover story for Venice for the National Geo. I was taken with Casanova's prison cell in Venice. They give that as part of a tour, but you have to ask for it to be included. What I was most taken with is Casanova was sentenced to a 20-year prison sentence. So you see the cell, and he befriended the guard. And the guard, over time, over a 2-year period, became very close to him and helped Casanova escape. So he still had 18 years left on his sentence. And the rule back then was if you escaped while the guard was under the guard's watch, the guard had to finish the rest of your sentence. So then the guard who helped Casanova with his friend was in prison for 18 years. For me as a writer, the beauty of the story is 15 years later, Casanova's world famous there, or famous throughout Italy. He visits the guard who's in prison. And I said, the gall on this guy, and it's a great story. A sad story for the guard, but a great story it tells you like all you need to know about Casanova. So I definitely would visit that. And then for Ischia, I think the castle. The castle is fascinating because it has so many things in it. It has a 5-star restaurant called the Monastery. It has a small boutique hotel of about 10, 15 rooms, 5-star hotel. It has a medieval torture chamber room that you could tour and visit of everything that was used by the Greeks and the Romans and the Moors and the Neapolitans, whoever took control of Ischia from centuries back. And it has the cemetery of dead nuns. So within a 4-level stretch of the castle, it has a cemetery, a hotel, a restaurant, and a torture chamber. And also you get to the very top, the best view in all of Ischia. You see the entire Bay of Naples. So it's a pretty great place to visit. So those are off the top, the 3 places I would check out.
Amazing. Thanks for all the recommendations. Fabulous. Okay, so even though we're here to talk about Nona Maria and the case of the stolen necklace, you kind of let me know that you're working on book 3. So can you tell us what book 3 is about?
Well, I can tell you it's called Nonna Maria and the Case of the Lost Treasure. And it's part of it is a treasure hunt. And I end book 2 with a cliffhanger. So by the end of book 2, you'll know what the second crime is going to be. The first case that Nona gets involved in, obviously, will be the treasure hunt. And a friend of hers comes to her with a map left to her by her grandfather, but she doesn't know what he left her. And the caves of Ischia will be explored, which are fascinating. I spent a lot of time last summer in Ischia doing a lot of the research there. And then if you get to the end of the book and you read the cliffhanger, you'll know what happened, what she's going to do. The second case involves someone who has threatened the life, who is out to end the life of the Carabinieri captain. So she has to prevent a murder instead of helping to solve a murder. So those are the two cases in Nona 3. And I can tell you something about Nona 4 that we're going to do. If you
Oh,
have
love it. Yes, please.
Nona 4, we're going to bring in someone else to help her. She has a granddaughter. She has many grandchildren, as you know from reading the books.
Mm-hmm.
She has a granddaughter in New York City who's studying to be a doctor. So in between her semester break, she goes to live with Nonna Maria for the summer in Ischia. And she will help Nonna Maria work on the cases. So it almost is a transfer from one generation to the other. And perhaps down the road, we'll do a spin-off and use the young lady in New York to help solve some crimes for her friends. But it gives me someone else that Nona Maria can work on in number 4, work with rather, in number 4, working with her granddaughter, who is a medical student and in her 20s, and Nona in her 70s. You got the Carabinieri captain and the whole crew that's working with her. So that's probably the book I'll start in the summer. Number 4, but number 3 is the Lost Treasure. I don't have a title for number 4 yet, but so they're the next one, and I believe 3 will be out this time next year. So
Yay. That's amazing. I love knowing what's ahead, love having something to look forward to, rather. So that's really exciting. But I'm really curious about your reading life, though, Lorenzo. So tell me about the last books or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
Well, I read 3 at a time. I try to read a nonfiction book. I
Mm-hmm.
try to read a novel, and I try to read a book that we all have that stack of books that we've all meant to read in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetime, and we just never, for whatever reason, never got around to it. So one that I've always meant to read and never got around to it was Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye, and I just finished that. I read out loud. I actually read to my bulldog. I know that sounds odd, but I like to read out loud to just hear the pace of the book and how the author builds his plots. So I'm reading that. I finished The Last Goodbye. Now I'm reading Brian Cox's memoir, the actor from Succession, which is called Putting the Rabbit in the Hat, and it's fascinating. And I just love reading about writers and actors and how they go about their profession and how they get started and the ups and downs of the career. I just finished reading Dan Silver's The English Girl, and I'm going to start Dan Silver's The English. No, I'm sorry, I finished the English Spy, and now I'm about to start The English Girl. And I finished a wonderful book by John Grisham called The Reckoning prior to Dan Silva. And I'm going to read Michael Conley. I'm going to start, actually, Michael Conley, I'm going to start or restart going back to the first one. I just had they had a party for him recently, and I've known him a little bit over the years. So I'm going to start with the Black Echo, which I believe was the first one, just to look at the progression that he's made through the 30 odd books that he's done. And he's added, as you know, over the years, the different characters. And then I go back to my go-to book, which is my favorite book of all time, and I do read it once a year. Or I try to read it once a year. The Count of Monte Cristo. That and the Friends of Eddie Coyle. The Friends of Eddie Coyle made me want to write the gritty books that your husband loved. It's a great. I mean, if anybody out there wants to learn, if you pay attention to that book, which is not a thick book, it's 166 pages, I believe. It's basically, if you break it down, it's almost a how-to on how to write a crime thriller. It's great dialogue, great characters, great everything, and it just moves like a runaway train. The Count of Monte Cristo is not 166 pages. It's about 1,000, whatever, 42 pages or something like that. But I'm thrilled that I think it was Modern Library, the Random House Penguin edition,
Mm-hmm.
many years ago asked me to do the introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo. So since Dumas is my favorite all-time author, if you go on one of the Amazon or whoever, my name, if you call up the modern library version of Count of Monte Cristo, it says Lorenzo Carcaterra and Alexandre Dumas, and I said that's as great as it's ever going to get for me. Um, and so I try to read. I mean, I started as a kid with that on the classic illustrated comics.
Ah, see, I was actually going to ask you what was your favorite as a child growing up, and if you were an avid reader even then. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I went to Catholic grammar school and high school, and the teachers there were smart enough to know that, you got to get them hooked on reading. And I was really into classic comics and comics in general, but I love classic comics. And then, one of the brothers told me, look, this is an actual book. So the curriculum they set up for us, we were divided. The girls in third grade went with the nuns, the boys went with the brothers. So it was a poor neighborhood. It was a tough neighborhood. So to get us, their feeling was if we get them hooked on a book, then we got them hooked on reading, and that may be an escape route for them out of the neighborhood. So rather than give us a curriculum where we would be bored out of our minds with some book, like they knew not to give us The Catcher in the Rye. We could not identify, with that character. So instead, they gave us Jack London, Raphael Sabatini, Victor Hugo, Alexander Dumas, and suddenly these characters all came to life for us. And also, they were also classic illustrated comics. So in case you
Mm.
didn't finish the book, you could go read the comic for the quiz and still pass the quiz. But that got us hooked. So Dumas, Sabatini, Hugo, Jack London. I even read a great biography of Jack London called Sailor on Horseback when I was a teenager. Um, those were that formed the foundation, and then you graduated, to Elmore Leonard and George V. Higgins and Hammett and Dashiell Hammett, who was a big influence. Not in my writing, but just in reading. You just enjoy Hammett. I mean, the conversations I had with some of the teachers, I was really lucky to have, was that I was a copy boy at the New York Daily News, and I got to spend a lot of time with Pete Hamill and Jimmy Breslin, and they were very big influences on my life, especially Pete. Pete would take whatever time he had, and he was, God love him for doing this. He would go through line by line of all these little articles I was writing, and he didn't need to do that. He just did it and helping educate me. That was like my writing school. And so I read everything Pete's written, his novels, his short stories, his journalism collections, and all. Um, so it was an education, and one of the best advices, a piece of advice a teacher gave, is if you're reading a book, Victoria, and you're really taken by the author, you're young
Yeah.
and you want to go into this career, and you really love the book, and the authors are obviously alive, write him or her a letter. And he said to me in particular, he said, 9 out of 10 times, you're not going to hear a response. You're going to get nothing. So all you're out is some letter and a stamp. But that 10th time could be somebody to help you. And that's how I get to be friends with a number of writers. If I really was taken, I still do it to this day. I wrote a letter to a guy who wrote the biography of Mike Nichols, which about a year or so ago. I was just thought it was a great piece of work. I'll write Brian Cox an email if I can get his email to tell him, great job he did on his book. I wrote Michael Caine an email. I read his 2 bios. And I mean, I read a lot of I was struck by this with Brian Cox. I read Brian Cox's book, Gabriel Byrne's book, Michael Caine's 2 books. And what I was struck by all 3 of them is that they were all dirt poor in the beginning, and we're all told that you're not going to be a success, that you can't be an actor by a number of people, not just one person. Michael Caine was actually called by a prominent casting director to be told, you don't have the look, you don't have the skill, you don't have the talent, you don't have the ability to be a movie star, let alone an actor. So find a profession, be a plumber. And he just said, okay, that's your opinion, and went on to do whatever became a major star. I'm sure he would have been a fine plumber. But so stories, I'm always been impressed with people who start at zero and make a career and succeed, because that takes a lot of it takes a lot, because you're going to hear no more than you hear yes in your career, and it's been true in my career as well in the early days. People are no is easy. No cost people doesn't cost you anything. Yes means I'm investing in you. I'm trusting that you're going to deliver something. And so that's a big leap for the person at the other end of the desk. So yeah, so the books I really still learn. I mean, I got a lot to learn, but there are gaps in my education. I reread The Day of the Jackal recently, which I think is the greatest, one of the best thrillers ever written. And I listened on audio to Frederick Forsyth's memoir. And Day of the Jackal is so great, so gripping. And then I read he wrote it in 44 days.
No
Which,
way.
yeah, which is pretty stunning to me. And but it reads like, again, it's just like a charged engine going full throttle. And then I'm reading now a book I've always meant to read is Paris Burning, and I could see that Forsyth it had to be influenced because there's the same kind of staccato delivery of the dialogue, and the movement of the book moves very rapidly as Paris Burning. So he had to. He was a reporter. He was covering a number of things. He worked for the BBC. So I think, he had to have read that book. It sold so many copies, and it probably had some influence on him. I don't know that for a fact, but you just feel it by reading Jackal, which is a terrific thriller. And that's a template for thriller writers. So there are books if you want to be a writer that you could start with and learn from. And Elmore Leonard, you learn that you could start a scene in the middle of a conversation, which most people don't do. And you can see people. We don't steal, you borrow. And, but like in Lethal Weapon 2, Shane Black was a huge Elmore Leonard fan. Shane Black wrote the script for Lethal Weapon 2. Lethal Weapon 2 starts in the middle of a car chase. So that's clearly influenced by Leonard starting a scene in the middle of a conversation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
You just got to keep at it. You got to read newspapers. You got to read magazines. You got to watch as many television and shows and movies as possible. Because you learn more about writing you can learn as much about writing from watching a Yellowstone or Succession as you can from reading a book. And because, that's writing is writing. Good writing is good writing. And, years ago when I was doing interviews, I interviewed Clint Eastwood a number of times. And he
Wow.
told me that he also went to see good movies and he went to see bad movies.
Yeah.
So I said, well, why do you see a bad movie? He said, so I learned what not to do.
You know what? I love hearing that because I often say to folks, it's not a bad thing that you read a bad book. They all can't be great books.
Right.
If someone says a book is really bad, I'm like, really? And sometimes I will purposefully read that book. So actually hearing that is very validating in a way.
Right. You can learn as much from something bad. I mean, you see a bad play, you go home and you start thinking, well, what could he have done differently, or what could he have, then you see a great play. And then you go, oh my God, I can never do. I mean, it could be a great work could be intimidating. Something that you don't like can be like, well, I could do that. I know how to do that. I mean, the famous author Harold Robbins always had a soft spot in my heart because I'm from a neighborhood in New York called Hell's Kitchen, and Harold grew up in an orphanage in Hell's Kitchen. So I believe I was 21 years old, and I was sent by the Daily News to interview him. And the day before my interview, the book critic of the Daily News tore apart his new book. I mean, ripped it to shreds. I went, oh my God, I got to go talk to this guy. And this critic ripped him apart. And Harold was, but at that point, he was the richest writer in the world. And he lived up to his reputation. He had an open shirt. It was 9:00 in the morning. He was eating caviar, drinking champagne. And he had these gold chains around his neck. And we talked and we really hit it off. And then I was ready to leave. He said, hey, kid, do you know this book critic at the paper? I said, I know him, but he's not a friend. I didn't know him well, the guy. I just knew enough to say hello. He said, well, do me a favor, will you? He takes a photo out of a briefcase, and it's a picture of a yacht. I'll never forget. It's a color photo of the largest yacht I've ever seen. He said, tell him this is the boat I bought with the book he just ripped apart. That's the money I used to buy this boat. And I said, that's a very Hell's Kitchen move. Thank you. I will tell him that. and it was like, Hell's Kitchen, everything was about getting even and revenge. And that was Harold. He never lost that edge. And if you have a moment, I have a quick Harold Robbins story, which I feel like.
Oh, please.
The great Michael Korda was his editor. And the way, towards the end of his life, sadly, Harold was losing it a little bit. And the way he would write is he'd send half his book to Michael. Michael would edit that half, put it on the shelf, and wait for the second half to come a month or 2 months later, whenever. So the second half of that book comes. Michael starts editing it, and then he starts realizing as he's reading the full book that in the first pages, Victoria is now Angela, Lorenzo is now Frankie, Sam is now Joe. And he says, all the names have been changed. So he calls Harold and he said, Harold, we got to work this out. Harold had no patience for editing. His idea was you do a first draft, then call me when it's time to go sell the book. He was a great salesman. So Michael said, we got to do this. So they start going through it. They get through about 25 corrections. And finally, Harold, who has very little patience, said, Michael, I got an idea. And Michael said, what is it? He goes, why don't we just let the reader figure it out? And he hung up. And Korda tried to correct as much as he could. And he swore, I read more Korda's biography. He swore that in the biography, he said, I swear, I didn't get all the names. I must have missed at least 10 of the bizarre name changes. The book was a monster bestseller. Not one letter, not one phone call, not one person said, hey, Victoria was Victoria. Now she's Angela. Angela's Victoria. I'm confused. Nobody. And so he said, I don't know what lesson that tells us, but he said, maybe Harold was right. They figured it out,
Wow. That is an amazing story. That is wild.
Yeah, he never lost that sort of street kid attitude he had throughout life, which was I admire.
But I'm really curious. What are your hopes for the Nona Maria series, and in particular this one, Nona Maria and the Case of the Stolen Necklace? What are you hoping readers might think or feel, or what are the reactions you're hoping for with this book?
I'm hoping they grow to embrace her and enjoy the story, enjoy her, enjoy their time spent with her. I hope, the first one apparently did well. I hope this does even better than the first one, because you want to grow the series. It's a business. They have to make money. And so that you hope people do respond to it and buy it and read it. And I just think if they can embrace Ischia and come to love it, I've gotten some feedback that a lot of people who have read the book either want to go to Ischia or are going to Ischia. So that's kind of cool. And what they seem to most like about Nona Maria, beyond her detective skills, is that she drinks 14 cups of coffee a day and drinks wine at night and doesn't touch water. That's their favorite part of her. And that's based on the real Nona, who did drink 14 cups and did drink white wine. Now, the reason she doesn't drink water is because Nona had to live during the war where Ischia was bombed regularly and the water wasn't drinkable. And still to this day, if you go there, you only drink mineral water, bottled water. Now, the one of the changes I should tell you I had to make by making her contemporary. She's in her 70s. Nona had a lot of interesting experiences, the real Nona, during World War II. I can't use that in the novel for Nona. So I then transfer those stories to Nona's mother and have her in the novels if she's going to tell a war story. But those stories were very vivid because the war, even though by the time I met her had been over, the war never kind of left their memory. There was just it was alive to them all the time. I was fortunate that even though I grew up with people who didn't read, my mother didn't read, my father probably couldn't read, but they were all gifted storytellers, as were the relatives in Italy. They were terrific storytellers. And you just listen. That's all you have to do as a writer sometimes, is just listen.
Absolutely. And oral storytelling has a very deep tradition. So I'm happy that, to hear your stories, both here on this interview, but also through your books. So Lorenzo, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Victoria. It's a pleasure. And thank you for asking me on, and hope to talk to you again soon. And thank your husband for reading my books. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.